Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Strat-Based ADR Institute's virtual town hall discussion today entitled Ensuring Power Supply Security for a Sustainable Economic Recovery. My name is Paco Pangalangan. I'm the Executive Director of Strat-Based ADR Institute, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's discussion. Before we move on and to our speakers, may I please first introduce the president of Strat-Based ADR Institute, Professor Dindo Manhit, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Paco. Good morning to our speakers, and we thank them for agreeing to be part of our panel as we discuss the topic for today's virtual town hall discussion, ensuring power supply security for a sustainable economic recovery. We are hosting this with our partner civil society organization, Citizen Watch. This pandemic, since last year, we have tracked it as one that provides for us challenges. And early on in the pandemic, if I remember right, May of 2020, our Strat-Based Research and Intelligence team identified 8 pandemic challenges. And one thing that we argued was the idea that this could be a long economic emergency. How do we resurrect our economy? How do we create investment-driven growth? How do we create jobs and improve lives of our people? This past few months, we have seen, if we look at newspaper reports, the easing of quarantine restrictions and the gradual reopening of the economy. Of course, we expected power demand to grow. And I believe from reports, it has already surpassed pre-pandemic levels. Especially Luzon, it has reached 11,640 megawatts, the highest on record this year. But side by side with this news is the fear of blackouts, alerts. Then you hear about Malampaya. That the Malampaya gas field underwent preventive maintenance from October 2 to 22 and was temporarily shut down, affecting 3,200 megawatts of power supply in the Luzon region. Very important in bringing back our economy to move forward. It made me reflect and write about it in one of my regular commentaries in the business world. I spoke of how concerns were raised on how our power plants were prepared to handle energy requirements. But the shutdown, if shutdowns were to continue, what would be the implications on power costs for households and businesses? What would be the extent of this disruption to the operations of businesses trying to recover? How can we really proceed in a post-COVID economic recovery? I've always viewed the Philippine energy sector as one that provides significant potential as a driver of economic growth in our country. We need to address rising electricity rates. It should be prioritized, since the top concerns of most Filipinos is dealing with the rising cost of living, services during these trying times of the pandemic. I would argue in my opening remarks that we need a stable power supply and modernize the country's electricity supply system, because it would improve our business climate, attract foreign investment, and create more jobs, especially when you look at data that we track with our partner survey institutions. Quality of life of Filipinos are worsening, not only from the pandemic, but worsening from the start of the pandemic. we continue to see these numbers from social weather station. We see from urgent personal concerns. That means the public would like government to deal more than the COVID economic challenges that they're dealing with during this COVID. Sabi nga na iba, in Tagalog or Filipino, presyo, kita. Then we had this study that we did with Social Weather Station just a few weeks back, a national study, whereby what should or what does the public or the voters want candidates to deal with going into the 2022 election? And 57% of them speak of controlling the prices of basic services and commodities. Maybe it's really tied up to the reality that this pandemic has crossed already to its economic consequences. People have accepted, would like to live with COVID, the realities of COVID, but how can they deal with these economic consequences? I hope, or we hope as an institution, as we bring, that's why we call this virtual town hall, we bring stakeholders, we bring our participants, that I think we had over 500 registrations this past few days, that we need to ensure the security of the Philippines' energy supply. We are known as a security institution concerned on risks, both political and security risk. And in reality, this is what we call in the study of security as what we call non-traditional threats. We need energy policies to further protect consumers from high electricity prices and the economy from losses caused by power outages. And it takes a collaborative effort from all energy stakeholders to make this happen. I still wish, as a leader of this institution, that we can help foster sustainable and inclusive economic growth for the whole nation, uplifting the lives of millions of Filipinos. We're entering an election year, and may ensuring the security of the Philippines' energy supply be one of the core issues to help uplift the lives of our people and help us recover. Again, good morning, welcome, and thank you for participating in a virtual town hall discussion this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Manhit, for your opening remarks and for setting the stage for this morning's discussion. At this point, I'd like to introduce next our Senator Win Gatchalian, who with over 20 years of experience in public service currently serves as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy. He has spearheaded the passage of several key measures aimed towards the protection of Filipino consumers and the development of an ideal business climate for the country's energy sector, as well as the economy as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, who will be delivering today's keynote address.
Thank you. Thank you, Paco. Can you hear me, Paco?
Loud and clear, po.
All right, thank you. First of all, let me greet our dignitaries for this morning. Let me greet President Dindo Manhit and excellent opening remarks. In fact, I'll be addressing some of his items, some of the items that he mentioned earlier in his opening remarks. Let me also greet Mr. Jose Alejandro, Chairman Ernesto Pantanco. Nice to see you, Ernie. Ernie is a mainstay, a suki of the Energy Committee as one of our resource persons.
Good morning, Senator.
Morning, Ernie. Good to see you. Let me also greet Chairman Meneleo Carlos. Let me also greet Mr. Romy Bernardo. And let me also greet President Nonoy Oplas. Let me also greet some of our friends from the consumer advocates, of course, are one of our mainstays also, Attorney Vic Timagiba, a good friend of mine, Attorney Terry Ridon, Professor Louis Montemar, and Mr. Orly Oxales. So good morning, everyone. And let me share my slides. I was given a very specific topic to discuss today. So I prepared a PowerPoint presentation and, discussing energy is very difficult without any visuals and any PowerPoint presentation. You'll get lost with the mumble jumble and the numbers being floated around. So let me share my slides and bear with me with the amount of information that I'll be throwing, but I'll keep it very simple. And as you all know, I'm sure President Dindo knows that energy is no simple subject matter. It's very complex, but I'll keep it very simple for all of us so that we can be on the same page. So I was given the task of to talk about power supply security, or in short, electricity security. And we have identified 5 ways to achieve this in our country, among many things, no? And but I'll break it down in 5 simple ways so that everyone will be on the same page. So, but before that, let me just throw in some basic numbers. This is the generation mix of our country, in which 50% comes from coal, 70% comes from gas, and the balance comes from various renewable sources, hydro, geothermal, and RE. And over the past few years, our demand and supply has been growing at approximately 4%, more or less. This is actually faster before the pandemic, around 5%, but after the pandemic, it has slowed down to about 4%. So it more or less mirrors the GDP growth. So as our economy grows, our demand for electricity grows, and our supply obviously catches up with the supply. In terms of the future, we will need approximately 66,000 megawatts of new power. And if you can see, the DOE has programmed several sources of new power, in which renewable will be a main supplier of this new requirement for power. So we will need approximately 66,000 megawatts of new capacities in the next 20 years until 2040. In terms of pricing, and this is actually quite a discouraging slide, because we're actually above average. It doesn't matter when it comes to residential, industrial, commercial prices, but the basic fact is we're above global average. In fact, we're in line with a lot of the developed nations when it comes to retail prices. And this is quite discouraging, because if we are paying this much and we're already compared to a lot of the advanced nations, we should be given back through good service, or at least constant supply of electricity. But that's not the case. In the past 6 years, we've experienced approximately 122 red alerts. In fact, there were brownouts, or manual load dropping, about 119 instances in the past 6 years. If you look at 2020 and 2021, that's an aberration. We all know it's the pandemic, so we had an excess supply of electricity. Therefore, red alerts were not as common in the past. But then again, we still had red alerts. In fact, this year, May of this year, we had brownouts. So despite paying high prices, we still have threats of red alerts and even brownouts. This is actually a discouraging slide. If you look at the demand and supply earlier, you probably note that there is more supply than demand. But how come we're experiencing brownouts? And last May, we experienced 4 days of manual load dropping in different parts of Luzon. And the culprit, in simple terms, we experienced unplanned outages amounting to 4,000 more or less in terms of capacities. And this is actually a very cause of concern. Imagine 4,000 of unplanned outages. We didn't plan this. Nobody saw this, and this affected the integrity of the grid. That's why we experienced brownouts. So what are the solutions? And I won't go into the different bullet points. I'll leave the slide to everyone, but I'll just talk about the most important in the different 5 ways that we identified. Number 1 is we need to attract new supply by reducing red tape. Red tape is still the enemy of putting up new supply. We enacted the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop law. We managed to lower down the number of days to set up a new power plant. But still, if you look at prior to this law, it takes about 1,876 calendar days to put up a plant. That's approximately 5 years. With this law, we managed to reduce it to 4.8 years. But still, if you look at the number of signatures, the number of laws, the number of contracts that one power plant needs to go through in order to inject power into the grid, this is how much bureaucracy that it needs to navigate. So we need to continuously lower it down. We need to fully implement this law. This law is quite powerful in terms of giving significant authority to DOE to lower down electricity rates. Because of red tape, we discovered that almost 71% of committed power plants are delayed. And this is actually a big cause of concern. And I'll show that later on, how this affects the integrity of the grid and potential brownouts later on. So number 2 is a diversification of energy supply, particularly maximizing renewable energy and diversification of energy sources. We have approximately 31,000 megawatts of potential power through RE. That's half of our requirement in the next 20 years. Remember, we need about 60,000+ of new power. 31 can be drawn out of renewable sources. So imagine indigenous sources. We don't need to import coal or other forms. In terms of crude oil, we import close to 97% of crude oil coming from just one region. 72% comes from the Middle East. In terms of coal, I showed you earlier that half of our generation comes from coal. We import close to 70% of our coal coming from one country. 96% comes from Indonesia. So if something happens in the Middle East, if something happens in Indonesia, then our energy security will be affected. And that's why one of the policy reforms that we are pushing is to diversify this. We should not be reliant on just one region and one country. Just to give you an example, Singapore and Japan doesn't produce a single ounce or a single quantity of coal or oil and gas, but yet they've managed to diversify their sources so that they're not beholden to one region or one country. And this is a model that we're trying to push government so that we can have a diversified source of fuel. 3 is to undertake aggressive oil and gas exploration. We still need to do this. I believe in the energy transition. Oil and gas will still be a relevant source of fuel in the next 20, probably 30 years. And based on the DOE data, we have enough oil to power our economy for the next 36 years and enough gas to power our economy for the next 6 years, because we're not utilizing the gas we have. And the reason for that is we're not exploring. In terms of the number of exploration across the region, we're one of the lowest. Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia produce their own gas. And the reason for that is they're exploring much more than us. So we need to continuously explore to look for those resources. Number 4 is energy efficiency and conservation. And we have a fantastic law, the Energy Efficiency Conservation Act, RA 11285. And basically, this law aims to promote energy efficiency and conservation across the country in all industries, even appliances. And again, we gave a lot of authority and power to DOE to even impose minimum energy performance standards for commercial, transportation sector, even consumer products. I encourage everyone to look at this law. This law is still at its infancy stage, but I believe that a megawatt saved is the same as a megawatt produced. So we need to push for this law. And lastly, synergy, efficiency, accountability of public and private stakeholders. Our energy, both our energy and the electric power industry are fully deregulated, but we need to impose discipline among the energy players, discipline among generation, transmission, distribution, even the supply side, no, to ensure compliance. Just to give you an example, these are the big ticket transmission lines that were supposed to be completed a long time ago, but they're all delayed. One of the most important is the Visayas-Mindanao interconnection, wherein we can have the capability to get excess power supply from Mindanao and bring it all the way to Luzon, but it's delayed, no? So we cannot do that. In terms of power generation, the ERC promulgated what they call the reliability index, where power plants are given certain amount of days, no, to perform maintenance, but 17 power plants went beyond the reliability index, and that's approximately 5,400 megawatts of power, no, that are not compliant to the reliability index. So we need to impose discipline. The regulator needs to make sure that the power players are performing up to standards. So just to share with the body what are the legislative activities that we have conducted, or the laws that we have enacted to promote energy security. Number one is the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop to reduce red tape, the Anti-Obstruction of Power Lines Act to hasten the repair of power lines and also to build more power lines. We already approved the Microgrid Systems Act, and the aim of this law is to use microgrids to finally electrify 1.5 million households that have no electricity. We're close to approving the Electric Vehicles and Charging Station Act. This law aims to promote electric vehicles and also the rollout of the necessary infrastructure for electric vehicles. We also filed a bill on Midstream Natural Gas Industry Development Act. This is in preparation for the depletion of Malampaya and encourage investors to put up regasification and importation terminal. And lastly, we also filed a bill to streamline the PNOC, no? So that PNOC will do one thing, no? Explore oil and gas. And as part of my assignment, I was given an assignment to talk about the power supply outlook come 2022. Now, as what Dindo mentioned earlier, it's an election year, and we all know that we use automation to count our votes, and we have to make sure that there's supply to electricity supply to run those PICOS machines, which will count our votes. So we requested information from IMAP, and this is in a nutshell, no, there are a lot of slides, but I'll just make it simple. This is the Luzon outlook, no. On the left side is the outlook if all the committed plants will come online on time, no? So just to make it simple, the red line should not cross the blue line, no? That's the supply and demand. So if you have all the new supply coming in on time, you will have less chance of experiencing red alerts and brownouts. But on the right side of the slide, you can see that the red line has crossed the blue line, meaning demand overshot supply. In this particular case, especially the red box, that's during the election time, or that's during the summer and the election time. We will see that we will experience red alerts and brownouts if we don't get the new supply online. That's why I was talking about red tape. I was showing to you how many plants were delayed, and there's now a risk, no, based on the time frame and the number of delayed power plants that we saw on the list. There's a big risk that we will experience red alerts and brownouts here in Luzon next year summer, no? And this has prompted us to look at this very closely. We'll conduct hearings later on to make sure that government has mitigating measures and can avert the potential red alerts and brownouts, especially during election time. The same with Visayas, except it's not as critical, but you can see from the right side chart, if power plants will not come on time, online, we'll experience brownouts during summer in the Visayas, no? So again, our course of action here is to conduct hearings and to demand solutions that will avert all of these red alerts and brownouts. So once again, thank you very much for inviting me to this event, and I look forward to hearing our fellow presenters later on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Sherwin. Yeah, thank you for very effectively introducing our topic to our audience this morning and for starting the conference. But even more than that, thank you for your continued support and advocacy to ensure Filipinos have access to reliable and secure power. So thank you, Senator Sherwin. Next up, now we move on to our first panelist for this morning. And our first panelist for this morning who will continue our discussion on improving competitiveness by reducing power rates is none other than Attorney Jose Alejandro, an advisor for energy and power and the chair of utilities of the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or PCCI. Attorney Jose Alejandro has over 25 years of corporate experience as a business and management professional and leader. He is a director of publicly listed telecommunications firm Now Corporation. He also has been a member of the board of directors of Now Telecom since 1989 and now serves as the board's chairman. So good morning, Sir Alejandro, and welcome to today's discussion. The floor is yours, po.
Good morning. Senator Chayan, Mr. Manit, and Mr. Pangalan. Thank you very much. The opening remarks, the report of the senator is very, very informative. But let me start off by presenting what I believe should be how to address the issue and what our outline of presentation will be. First, I would like to present first the facts and fiction about our power costs. Number two, this is going to be the outline of my presentation. The next one will be the time to act and some good news. The fourth is the competitive reality that we are experiencing today. The fifth, our real concern. And the last one will be, what are going to be our winning cards? Let me start off by saying our premise on facts and fiction. Our economic development will not depend entirely on lower power rate. But trimming down the rate to the lowest level by law can be done to a reasonable level. But it is generally a combination or bundle of factors that make the situation competitive. Likewise, reducing power may be doable only to a certain extent because our local of natural constraints and legal limits. But trimming the rate to the lowest level by law can bring down power rate to a reasonable level. Very recently, the National Economic Authority, the NEDA, and the Philippine Statistics Authority reported the following good news. Number one, our GDP growth is beginning to improve and to recover. But sustainability will depend highly on the action we take in dealing with the virus. Next, on the manufacturing trend, there's a very strong recovery of manufacturing in the third quarter of 2021. Fourth, on the export performance, there's this very strong recovery of export and imports that will continue to the third quarter of 2021. There is also a very good signal and improvement in the unemployment rate in 2020 and 21, even with the heightened quarantine. a definite good performance to start taking actions to carve out recovery in new and better than light manufacturing for foreign and local investments. Our comparative electricity rate. This is our latest figure, came and supported by Meralco. But for over 3 decades now, remember my word, 3 decades now, our power rate, both for residential, commercial, industrial sectors, have been very significantly higher, showing over 25% to as high as 87.5% over our leaders competitor. You will note that in Malaysia, we are already said 87.5 higher. In Indonesia, 87.5 higher. Against Vietnam, we are 50% higher. And in Thailand, we're 36% higher. And yet, Japan and Singapore, whose power rates are higher, the respective economies are very significantly better than ours, and that of our neighbors as well. So where does the answer, where lies the answer really? Is it the sheer power rate? Our real concern really is that this critical issue of challenge, one that is admittedly prominent, somehow and for whatever reasons, continue to escape the full attention of our 4 past administrations. Repeat, 4 past administrations, and including the one at present. We cannot recall any open or closed door sustained discussions among cabinet members. We have yet to see the president's team hold interagency consultative meetings to address this concern and draw some team action program. Only the private sector appears to be tirelessly trying to raise and drive this issue and the need for action. And as you will see, which we would like, with permission of the senator, only the Senate, through Senator Gatchalian, seems to be so concerned about this issue. In fact, he sounds more like he is the national power leader rather than the senator. She has presented us stories and facts that we would like to expect from the executive department. If only they will do it. We're confident that the formidable team of the president today can find effective team action on how to cure this issue of having high power rate as a minus mark to investment transformation. If Japan and Singapore can do it with their high power rate, why can't we? That's always been the nagging question, because we'll never be able to bring down our power rate lower or equal to our neighbors. And yet, what are we really doing? The critical issue, the challenge, is admittedly prominent. Somehow, we need to do something. And we propose this as our winning cards. First, we need to determine our priority. Do we want economic development or decarbonization? Which one do we want to do next first? Do we want more subsidized renewable energy or direct source of fossil plant that will directly power the industry? You will note today, US, Japan, and other EU countries have set sustain economic recovery and growth as their priority. And they have pushed back all their decarbonization programs to 10 years or so away and accompanied with some harsh programs. And yet here we are. We're trying to do it this year and next year. We need to rationalize what is it that we want to do. Number two, the economic cluster must continue to act as one body and develop various investment packages that include all key elements, including power cost and availability. In other words, we have to package our power cost with our advantages to improve our economy. Because leading with our power, it is not right to lead our negotiation with our power cost. We need to continue to establish a sustained, reliable, and quality power regime, which was very pointed by Senator. We need to complement, not amend, I repeat, not amend, complement or supplement as needed the APIRA with presidential decrees in order to officially pinpoint the seat of responsibility for power supply and reserves. There's always cry amending, complement and supplement by presidential decree can be done to strengthen our power program. Number 5, tighten and make punctual, reliable, and truly professional the power regulatory system. Make it professional, punctual, and reliable. Number 6, focus on what responds best to, repeat, to industrial power needs, coupled with aggressive campaigns to bring back several hard manufacturing clusters. As you know, these hard manufacturing investors have left us 3 decades ago. And all these power costs appear to be uncontrollable. And there's nobody packaging our economic advantage. While these free trade zones are doing something else, our other departments are doing another thing. There seems to be no package deal being done by this country to really improve investment. Number 7, act and decide with a positive sense of urgency, focus, integrity, unity, and courage. But with one caution, be aware of the disturbing distraction effect of the forthcoming election. That is our proposal today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Alejandro. That was very insightful book. And a lot of great points there, especially as we move, like you said, towards an election, and a new economic agenda is definitely needed for the next administration. And energy should definitely play a part in that agenda. So with that, thank you, sir. And please allow me, before I move on to the next speaker, I wanted to let our participants know, we have almost 400 of them with us now, that they can actually send in their questions through the Q&A function of Zoom. And later on, just to give you a flow of the discussion, which I forgot to do earlier, and I apologize for that, is that our speakers will have like around 10 minutes each to share their insights. And then afterwards, towards the end of the program, we're going to have a Q&A, an open forum where the questions that have come in through the Q&A or through email or through text we'll try to go through them during the open forum. So yeah, sorry for that, for the abrupt change of topic. But now I would like to get back on program and move on to our next speaker. So thank you again, Mr. Attorney Alejandro. Next up, we have our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Ernesto Pantanco, who's the Energy Committee Chairman of the Management Association of the Philippines. He was a former executive vice president of 2 of the country's leading energy firms, First Gen Corporation and the EDC, Energy Development Corporation. He was also the former president of the Philippine Independent Power Producers Association. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ernesto Pantanco. Sir?
Thank you very much. Honorable Senator Win Gatchalian, Professor Dindo Manhit, and the STAT-based team, fellow participants, pleasant good morning. Thank you for inviting me to give my perspectives on the topic, ensuring power supply security for a sustainable economic recovery. I would like to present the issue of security from these three perspectives. One is supply, two, cost of power, particularly generation cost, and three, demand side management. These are the three factors that are crucial from a business perspective point of view. I will be sending my speech in with I have very few slides, but I'll be sending it for those who may want to read it a bit later. In terms of the energy mix, as far as the supply is concerned, our electric power mix in the country is predominantly coal. Specifically in Luzon, coal accounts for 56% of our energy mix. In Mindanao, coal accounts for close to 72% of our energy supply. Visayas has a more balanced energy mix since geothermal comprises a greater percentage of power supply. Certain sectors present the fuel mix as more balanced in terms of capacity or megawatts, and this has been shown to the public. This is totally misleading and erroneous. A 100-megawatt coal plant can generate 85% of the time, so effective capacity is 85 megawatts. A 100-megawatt solar can generate only 16% of the time, so effective capacity is 16 megawatts. Why predominance of coal? Because it's the cheapest source of power in the past. I think the Honorable Senator Win had already given the statistics on the mix and so forth. And we would just like to highlight again that coal is one of the priorities, and we go to the next supply, which is natural gas. Malampaya gas accounts for close to 38% of Meralco's supply. The brewing issue is reliability of supply from Malampaya in both fuel source and generation. By mid-2022, June to be exact, the grid will lose 1,200 megawatts from the Ilihan plant. The KEPCO BOT contract is expiring, and rumors abound that the IPP administrator will not take over the plant because of the legally contested 22 billion in dues and penalties owed to PISAM. In addition, the fuel supply contract of NPC with the SPECS consortium is to expire simultaneously, and we are not sure if negotiations for extensions are ongoing. The issue of reliability of future supply of Malampaya gas, supposedly until 2026 or 2028, is now under uncertainty due to the sell-down of Chevron and SPECS to Udena. Who will operate the platform after Shell exits this year? Is there sufficient technical expertise? There are many financial constraints of the buyer. Projected budget for drilling. All of these were very aptly discussed in the last Senate hearing by Senator Win. And if you'll just watch the video on the hearing, he will give all the details of why this has caused major concern. If Udena flips the acquisition to a foreign group, which is most likely, they may not have the same interests as the country. Thus, the Philippines may lose its critical source of natural gas as an indigenous alternative fuel to an external group, aside from the state grid of China, which already controls operations of NGCP, the backbone of the power distribution nationwide. The next issue on supply is reliability. Most of the coal plants are approaching the end of their BOT contract period, Suwal, Pagbilao. Unless the IPP owners invest in modernization, then reliability of these plants are compromised. In addition, the peak off-peak recycling of these baseload plants to mid-merit historically severely affects the reliability of the equipment. How many times in the past do we hear the excuse, boiler tube leaks? Check the unscheduled outages of these plants and why ERC has imposed penalties. Scheduled maintenance have been extended such that it overlaps between power plants cannot be avoided. Thus, the yellow alerts in the second quarter this year is proof of this. Again, I would refer you to Senator Wynn's slides because he's more aptly prepared for the details. Transmission lines. The transmission scheduled completion of required upgrades is severely delayed. In particular, certain generation capacity that is already available cannot be dispatched. Dinginin, 300 megawatt, Unit 2 in Luzon. Close to 200 megawatts of biomass and solar plants in Negros cannot be dispatched. Luzon-Mindanao interconnection completion is nowhere in sight. So again, to echo Senator Wynn, excess generation from Mindanao cannot be used to augment Luzon shortages, to name a few. The other issue is renewable sources. MAP has always been supportive of renewable sources of energy, but hopefully the administration did nothing to increase the mix of renewables, which are currently cost competitive because of the supposed neutral fuel mix policy of the DOE. Critical hydro plants either cease to operate due to LGU assessments and or approvals required from what is known as the infamous NCIP, to name a few. The power supply situation will be very, very critical this summer of 2022 and the election period to boot. The next item I would like to bring up is the cost of power. While coal was predominantly cheaper in the past, recent world energy crunch experienced together with a shortage of coal supply have driven coal prices from $40 per metric ton to $220 per metric ton. World energy prices of LNG increased from $8 per million BTU to $43 per million BTU. Thus, this produces a double whammy on generation cost. If we had a more balanced energy mix together with renewable power plants, the impact would have been somewhat mitigated. Specifically, the coal plant's generation cost previously was 452 to 471 peso per kilowatt hour in January 2021. Now, it's at 6 pesos to 785 per kilowatt hour. Natural gas increased from 4 pesos per kilowatt hour to 540 per kilowatt hour during the same period. Natural gas prices, in terms of total generation cost, Meralco's generation cost in January 2021 was averaging 440 excuse me, per kilowatt hour. Now, if you check the website, it's at 5 pesos and rising. Business has always advocated not only a reliable supply, but stable prices of electricity. Note that the Philippine industries cannot compete with their ASEAN neighbors because of their fuel costs are heavily subsidized and have significant indigenous fuel sources like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, etc. In terms of demand, the Philippines has been fortunate that due to COVID-19, demand decreased by approximately 13% in 2021 and had a very minimal growth in 2022 due to the lockdowns imposed by government. However, once the economy opens, demand is expected to pick up at approximately 5.28% annually. This translates to a demand growth of close to 600 megawatts in Luzon or 800 megawatts in terms of total Philippine requirement per year. The solution, we think, comes not only from trying to increase the supply, but also from demand-side management. Demand-side management is a solution to tempering the growth of our energy demand, particularly the peak load. This comes in the form of energy efficiency studies to lower the energy consumption of industries, shifting operations from peak to off-peak hours, and availing of time-of-use tariffs. Installation of rooftop solar panels to assist in peak load production, etc. In addition, business can explore contracting directly with generators under the ARCOA provisions and GEOP options in order to lower their cost of production, i.e. generation cost if you contract directly under ARCOA is normally 1 peso cheaper than from the average generation cost of utilities. In summary, I wish to apologize for projecting a dim future of the power industry, and I don't want to be branded as a boy who cried wolf. But reality bites the dust, and business has to be prepared for a double whammy of reliable power supply, coupled with a significant increase in cost in the very near future. Last but not least, the MAP Committee on Energy is preparing a power industry guideline, which we hope will be addressed to the presidentiables as a guide to assure reliable power supply, and we would welcome your assistance in doing so. Again, thank you very much for your kind attention and a pleasant good morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ernesto Pagtanco, ladies and gentlemen, who discussed with us spurring private-public sector collaboration to increase power supply. Thank you, sir. At this point, I would like to move on to our next speaker for the morning. Our next speaker is Mr. Meneleo Carlos Jr., who is the Chairman Emeritus of the Federation of Philippine Industries, FPI. He is also the President and CEO of Resin Inc., a Filipino manufacturing company that has been operating for over 50 years. He will be discussing how to attain a balanced development of energy sources in order to prevent a supply shortage. Mr. Carlos, good morning po.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear po. The floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Senator. Thank you for giving us a terrific background to base our talk on, and also the preceding talk of Mr. Alejandro and Mr. Pansanco. I've been assigned to talk about adapting a balanced development of energy sources to secure a stable power supply for Luzon. Well, actually, at the same time, we're now experiencing a sudden rise in fuel prices, coal, oil, and gas, as we emerge from the downtrends imposed by 2 years of pandemic. There have been a sudden rise in demand, while the supply of these resources had slowed considerably during this period. And these shortages naturally result in a higher cost of electricity. Both of these aspects, supply and demand, are now loaded on our supply engineering and generating facilities. All of us will be affected by the supply shortages of both basic energy resources and power conversion facilities. We, the customers, create the demand. So I say, let us see what steps we must take to counterbalance the situation we're responsible for. First and foremost, we must implement energy conservation measures by reducing our energy consumption and every aspect of energy use. I headed the Power Patrol movement during the office of President Ramos in partnership with Secretary Sunny Viray. We conducted our campaign in 3 fronts: the industry group, the communities, and then the student bodies. We found that most industry and institutional groups were very well informed already about energy conservation measures And now Senator Wynn had mentioned the law that further mandates the formalization of these conservation measures. Well, many were actually already implementing these measures, especially the larger consumers. They knew what had to be done and were taking the necessary steps in all energy in all forms. And the owners were measuring results through their power and fuel bills. We found the community sectors, on the other hand, very interested in listening and having coffee with us and so on. But we found the lack of discipline in monitoring the results of any effort. And so when you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So we turned to the student bodies instead. And there we had the greatest satisfaction when, after giving the students pointers on how to conserve power, many schools agreed to engage their students in monitoring their power utility bill every month as they practiced these energy-saving measures that they learned. And we could see how they really were achieving results by reminding their parents to conserve or to practice power saving in their homes. This proves that energy-saving programs should be taught in school as important aspects of sustainable development measures. Our students are interested in the condition of the world that they will grow into and further develop. And these are important values, yardsticks, that will carry them into a sustainable future. It is essential that our educational programs should include those aspects that affect the lives of our students. And we must respect that they are an important decision maker in how they want these measures implemented. We need them as our partners in sustainable development. The second aspect refers to the insufficient capacity of existing plants to support the growing demand in the Luzon region. This is a microcosm really of the global situation, where there are not enough green energy resources being installed to replace the aging, dirty plants, and also to provide additional capacities as we raise people from their poverty level to a better quality of life. Much of the rising need for green power supplies is due to the lack of capital and management resources. This is where I ask those who have the financial resources to help in the following regard. First, if you can afford to install solar power to provide your power needs at home, please do so, because that will enable the limited supply to be provided to others. I assure you that it is commercially justifiable investment with a payback on less than 10 years at worst. Number two, if you can afford to replace your old appliances with more energy efficient ones, like old air conditioners, the ones with inverters, please do so, because there is also a decent payback for this investment and will release more power to others in need. Rooftop solar power heaters, solar water heaters are also very economical. Number three, if you travel a lot with your car, it is time to seriously consider shifting to electric vehicles, because you will immediately improve our air quality while saving on your fuel costs. It would be good if our utility companies could provide lower electricity costs to charge your batteries during the sleeping hours when power demand is low. Number four, there have been talks of the need to provide cold storage to farmers and fishermen in remote and isolated areas. One idea I had is maybe this offers an opportunity to use solar power to provide refrigeration, with ice making and storage representing the battery, so that you have a continuous cooling through the 24-hour cycle. In such a process, the surrounding villages can be provided nominal power for their lighting and telecommunication needs. Such social development investments should be provided all the incentives by our national and local authorities for the sustainable development that they represent. Number 5, in fact, as I say, solar power is an essential investment to provide power to remote and isolated areas that would be the last to be connected to our utilities, if ever. In this manner, we will be providing the essentials for primary human development, namely healthcare and education, through lighting and communications. These basic essentials should be provided by the local governments of these areas until the utilities are able to reach them. This is the very least among services that government ought to provide to our people in the most isolated areas. These are just examples of what we who constitute the demand side of the equation can do to help our resource suppliers and utilities as they shift from dirty to clean energy supplies. I assure you they're trying to do their best, and we should do our own in turn by continually driving for a sustainable development within our means. So we now ask our government to partner with us in this effort by providing us many incentives to enable more of us to participate in balancing the demand-supply gap as we shift from dirty to clean energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carlos. I think that was a great point you raised and really echoes one of the main advocacies as well of our institute, which is the need for a whole of society approach to addressing many of our issues. That's really about the collaboration of the different sectors, which includes for the issue of our energy security. So thank you, Mr. Carlos. Next up, I'll now move to our next speaker, and he is none other than Mr. Romeo Bernardo. Mr. Romeo Bernardo is the Vice Chairman of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, FEF. He is also a global source economist in the Philippines. Mr. Bernardo served as an undersecretary for the Department of Finance during the administrations of President Cory Aquino and President Fidel Ramos. He currently serves as a board member of several leading publicly listed firms in the banking, telecommunications, power, food and beverage, and mutual fund industries. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Romy Bernardo.
Thank you. Thank you, Paco.
Good morning, po.
Honorable Senator Gatchalian, President Dindo, ED Paco, distinguished fellow speakers and friends. My task is made easy by the excellent presentation of Senator Win and other panel members. I would single out Energy Guru Ernie Pantangco, who is the chair of our MAP Energy Committee, of which I am a board governor. While I have many affiliations, I was invited here as vice chair of the FEF, a think tank and advocacy group for good economic governance. Let me now go on with my presentation. As more than 25,000 delegates from over 150 countries conclude another historic COP in Glasgow, bringing to a close climate conference that plots the future of our planet, it is very timely that we gather today in this webinar that explores the energy needs of our country. Thank you, Professor Dindo and the Strat-based team, for this opportunity to present my perspective on the Philippine power system up to the middle of this decade. I titled this talk, Only as Strong as the Weakest Link. I begin by having a look at the global energy crisis, which uncovered vulnerabilities of other countries' energy systems. What can we learn from their experience? What were their weak links? Next, please. This global energy crisis is a product of many converging factors. And while my forthcoming points are not exhaustive, these illustrate a perfect storm of constrained energy production, tight supply of fuels, and high energy demand. I've explored this confluence in my column published by Business World a few days ago. It's titled, It's Not Being Green, and I invite you to read it. Next slide, please. Um, in Europe, the closure of coal and nuclear power plants, wind speeds in the North Sea being among the slowest in 20 years, and a post-COVID bounce back in economic activity all play a role. The droughts in China and the US are drying up rivers and reservoirs, vital for the production of zero-emission hydropower. Brazil is experiencing its worst drought in 90 years, not only adversely affected by hydroelectricity production, but also brought down ethanol production, a key biofuel, to 4-year lows. In China, coming from a cold winter, drawing down energy stockpiles, heavy rains and floods in the mid-year, closing down coal plants seem to be the main culprits. Isn't it ironic that right before the start of the world's most important climate conference of the year at Glasgow, the UK had to turn to fossil fuel plants to provide much needed power? Reports from COP26 go on to say that while many leaders pledged to remove fossil fuels from their energy diet, they're having a hard think about the vital role of coal, oil, and natural gas while at the event. Next slide, please. Adding renewable energy sources to the grid reduces dependence on fossil fuel. This is good. However, we fail to realize that with the more renewable energy in the system, energy supply becomes increasingly dependent on the weather, which is a challenge. This brings to fore the need for a balanced mix of energy sources, planned excess capacity, and storage capabilities in a country, or have the ability to trade energy with neighboring countries when there is a deficit or surplus energy production. Next slide, please. Based on the lessons dealt to more advanced nations this year, we can surmise that the decades-long transition to cleaner energy sources must be done in a well-calculated manner. It has to be a transition that is balanced and resilient, and which can sustain shocks caused by supply or demand fluctuations, or by both. It has to be a transition that does not expose weak links in the energy system. Let us turn our attention to the prospects of the Philippine power system, the topic which I have been asked to speak on. There is no one-size-fits-all, nor single energy transition pathway for all countries, simply because each nation's energy system and the national development aspiration that the energy system serves is unique. What are the lessons we can learn from this global energy crisis that affect many developed nations? How do we avoid the exposure of weak links in our own energy transition journey? Imagine a chain. At one end is power generation, or simply the production of electricity. On the other end are the consumers, the ones who use electricity to preserve and cook food, to work and study during the day, to keep the lights on at night, and to tune in to this webinar today. In the middle are the transmission and distribution, the means by which power is delivered. Next slide, please. You will see from this graph that installed capacity and power demand are closely following each other, often with very little reserves for the next 5 years. Note that installed capacity is not the same as actual power generation output, as Ernie Pantanco emphasized early on, since it is subject to capacity factors. For example, solar PV plants have a capacity factor of around 16% versus installed peak capacity. Next slide, please. For generation, it is important for government to craft generation-specific policies to stimulate industry members to build new capacity in order to avert possible supply gaps in the next 5 to 10 years. Government must promote the exploration of indigenous fuel supply and emissions-free power production technology. For example, near field and oil gas exploration around the SC38 Malampaya, more geothermal, hydro, wind, and solar Simply put, our country will need all of the energy and all forms of energy that we have in our portfolio to meet the needs of our developing country. All these need to work safely and reliably while we build more and cleaner energy sources. It is not fossil fuel energy or renewable energy. It has to be end. For consumers, we will need the help of the government, private sector, and civil society to drive greater energy efficiency. Government should promote electrification in transportation so that more of how we move people and goods can be powered by renewables. According to the DOE, in 2020, electricity powered only 0.1% of the country's transportation-related final energy consumption. We need to explore opportunities for greater efficiency and flexibility through behind-the-meter power generation and storage with support from government. The middle links, transmission and distribution, should work flawlessly, safely, and efficiently. Next slide, please. Transmission has to grow in step with generation in order to transport power where it is produced or where there's too much or where it is needed. Investments have to be made to ensure that the system is stable and responsive due to the complexity brought about by more intermittent renewable energy in the grid. Even more investment is needed to connect the main island grids of Luzon and Mindanao and the Visayas Islands so that power supply and demand can be balanced throughout the country, not just within each geographical region. Distribution utilities need to improve efficiency and uplift service delivery nationwide. Innovations like fully digital substations that improve control, reliability, and safety must be promoted. Inefficient and ineffective DUs or cooperatives must consolidate, partner with, or give way to more professional operators who can and will serve the customers better and safer so that the benefits of electrification can be enjoyed by more Filipinos. These are just some suggestions that I've chosen to highlight this morning. We do have limited time in this webinar and there's much that must be done in the next years. Recognizing the criticality of electricity sector to our country, I commend the points raised by the chairman of our Energy Committee, Ernie Pantangco, particularly on the crucial and urgent actions needed to secure energy supply to meet the energy demand when our economy recovers from the pandemic, making reference to the uncertainties around the Malampaya supply contracts. As I conclude my presentation, I would like to leave with you the final perspective of the Philippine power system, that is to consider the whole chain. I think this is the most important lesson that we derive from the experience in Europe, the Americas, and our Asian neighbors. The government must lead and develop an energy transition plan that has national potential in mind and is firmly anchored at the upliftment of the Filipinos and care for our environment. Only then can our country attract investments, technology providers, and long-term partnerships that will help bring about a robust and resilient energy ecosystem that will stand the test of shocks and time throughout our energy transition journey. Every country has a unique system. It is up to us to build the energy system of our future and to make every link a strong link. Thank you, sirs and moms.
Thank you, Mr. Romy. That was a very insightful talk, and thank you for sharing your points on the need for a holistic approach to building a sustainable and responsive energy system for the country. So also, I wanted to address briefly our participants as well at this point. We've heard a lot already from our speakers from the business sector, and now you might have noticed as well with Mr. Bernardo and our next speaker that we've shifted now a bit to hear from our think tank speakers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker, And he's none other than Mr. Nonoy Oplas, who's the president of Minimal Government Thinkers, a free market non-government think tank in Manila that is a member institute of the Economic Freedom Network Asia, based in Bangkok, and the Property Rights Alliance, based in DC. He also writes a column in Business World under the column My Cup of Liberty. Mr. Nonoy Oplas, ladies and gentlemen. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Nonoy.
Thank you, Paco. Thank you, Dindo, for this invitation. So my topic is blackout-friendly RE and high fossil fuel prices, the experience of Europe and lessons for the Philippines. Next. So this is what we're talking about, blackout-friendly Europe. In particular, this happened in September, October. So look at the headlines now. Europe energy crisis switch back to coal. Power cost could force metal producers from Europe. That's the industrialization. Renewable power fuel Europe energy crisis. Even in COP in Glasgow, coal keeps lights on because wind strikes, low wind strikes again. Starve of gas, Europe goes to coal. So Europe hates coal, and now Europe is desperate for coal because when they say that they scared of climate change 100 years from now, they actually are scared of blackout today, not next week or not next year. Okay, hard blackout. UK industry could face shutdown, wholesale gas prices become UK energy facing massacre amid soaring prices. So these are news report that I got from different sources. So with the smoke, there is fire. There is something really problematic with Europe. Next. Okay, this is blackout. We talk about Germany. So I got the data from November 2019 up to yesterday, the other day, November 9, 2021. So I only choose solar, wind, and onshore wind and offshore wind. Germany electricity generation. This headlines. European power grid narrowly misses widespread blackout due to frequency drop. That was January this year. And then February, Germany's green energy coal failure. Germany turns back because the solar panels were covered by ice. Okay, zero output of solar for so many months. So Germany, Europe, this is Europe's largest economy, the home of BMW, Benz, Bosch, Siemens, etc. Huge industrial product needing stable, predictable power in order to make the manufacturing good and stable procedure. Is now tinkering with unstable, unpredictable, intermittent solar wind. There's a huge gap between consumption and these two intermittent coal, gas, nuke, some hydro and biomass. So next. Here in the next couple of slides, I will share some of my recent columns. The title, Energy Prices, Climate Spending, and GCP. That was October 18. So if you look at the commodity prices, the year to date or from January end 2020, December 31, 2020 up to October 15 price changes, the TTF EU gas was 390% or practically 5 times higher than the year-end 2020 level. UK gas 316% or almost 4 times or more than 4 times. Coal 3 times, propane 2 times. I checked the data as of 8:30 this morning before we started. TTF gas 256%, UK gas 226%, coal 97%. The solar wind energy index remain negative, meaning they remain unattractive despite Glasgow meeting. Solar and wind energy index, they are unattractive. Next. Climate adaptation, and this is table 2 of my column in the same column. So while the Philippines was waiting for that $100 billion a year promised in Paris 2015, the Philippine government has been doing big time climate spending on its own. 184 billion pesos in 2020, 282 billion pesos in 2021 this year, and 284 billion pesos next year. So many agencies, whether they are DSWD, whether they are DAR or DOTR, they jump into climate. Why? Because there's big money. Money is coming, allotted by Congress and clapped by many environmentalists. Okay, the 282 billion pesos this year does not include your climate spending by LGUs. No? Like for instance, Makati is only 5% dependent on ADRi, 95% have their own money. So they do some climate meetings, climate spending. Okay, so LGUs not included there. And the Climate Change Commission, their main job is to attend climate junket every year. 118 million in 2020, 150 million this year, and 145 million next year. Next. This is my column last September. ADB Scale Coal Plan, Government Corporation and Power Transmission. Look at the table, okay? China, India, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam have expanded their coal consumption 4 times to 24 times from 2019 to 2019. Because they have high coal consumption, they also have high GDP expansion. In contrast, Germany, Italy, and UK have shrunk their coal consumption. From 1929, it went only to between 0.1 times to 0.5 times. It's practically decarbonization. And the GDP expansion have only expanded 1.5 times to 2.4 times. This is degrowth. Okay, degrowth economics, aside from tinkering with blackout economics. In contrast, Poland and Turkey do not follow Germany, Italy, UK, etc., and keep their coal consumption high. The GDP expansion was 3.7 times to 9.6 times from 1990 to 2019. So whether you are looking at Asia example or Eastern Europe example, the trend is there. The more you decarbonize, the more you think with degrowth economics. With the more you think with, the more you use fossil fuels, especially coal, the more you really deal with dynamic growth economics. Next. On my column last July, energy and economic growth. Okay, generation, coal. It's long, no? I like dealing with numbers and not kilometric words. 4 out of 5 countries with more than 1,000 terawatt-hour generation in the world also belong to the top 6 economy in terms of GDP size, and that is US, China, India, and Japan. The coal output at least 36% of total electricity generation, meaning they have the high coal consumption in 2020, are also the countries with high GDP growth from 2010 to 2019. China, on average, for the past 10 years, China 7.7%, Indonesia 7.0%, Vietnam 6.5%, Philippines 6.4%, that's India and Indonesia 5.4%, Malaysia 5.3%, Taiwan 3.6%, Korea 3.3%. In contrast, with decarbonized Europe with high solar wind, they have slow growth from 2010 to 2019. Germany only 1.9%, UK 1.8%, France 1.4%, Spain 1.1%, and Italy 0.3%. Again, more solar wind, more degrowth, more deindustrialization. Next. My column last 2 weeks ago, climate and coal, PSAM, NEA, and GCP. You know, ADB, they went into stop financing coal, and now they want acquire, retire, and coal, practically kill coal. And they targeted 3 countries in the ASEAN, Philippines, Vietnam, and India. Why? Because ADB can bully these 3 countries, but ADB cannot bully India and China. Look at China's coal consumption, so big that the coal consumption of the Philippines plus Vietnam plus India combined in 2020 of 6,000 petajoules 1 petajoule is about 277 gigawatt hour, was near China's consumption of 5,040 petajoules in 1969 and 6,947 petajoules in 1970. So the total consumption of these three countries, China, Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia in 2020 last year was what China consumed in 1969. I think many of the audience were not even born that year, no? Now, if you compare Japan plus Korea plus Taiwan coal consumption of 9,238 petajoules in 2020, also America's total coal consumption of 9,200 in 2020 was equivalent to China's 9,500 petajoules in 1975. So, pinagsama mo na yun si Japan, si Korea, sa Taiwan coal consumption in 2020, that is what China consumed in 1975. What's the lesson? ADB has selective bullying and double talk. Next. Glasgow. Here, the lesson here is the more climate alarm, the more climate extortion. To strike a climate deal, poor nations say they need trillions from rich one. That is before the Glasgow. And UN says money for programs must rise tenfold. Money, money, money. Now, as of yesterday, India says we will not commit to net zero unless you pay us $1 trillion, India alone, okay? And Africa wants $1.3 trillion also for us, okay? And they go to Glasgow to save the planet by shunning fossil fuel. Then they brag lots of fossil fuel, 400 jets, private jets, excluding commercial jets. The problem in Glasgow is lack of parking for the jet planes. And if you flap 26, where's my money? Do you have my money? Oh, it's my money. Okay, right. It's all money, money, money. They like ABBA. Money, money, money. It's all about climate. Next. Okay. I have 6 reasons why there is no climate crisis. There's no climate emergency. It is fiction and drama. It is political science that masquerade as climate science. One, the tropical cyclones today is not more frequent than decades ago. Look at the right. Okay, this is a global tropical. That's a global data. Okay, from 1970 up to October 31, 2021. Do you see any say that there are more storms today than yesterday? Oh, those are fictional statements, not factual. Of tropical cyclones, also known as accumulated cyclone energy or SACE, is not stronger than decades ago. If you look at again from 1970 up to October 31, 2021, that is the chart. The chart below. Now you can also not say that El Niño is also getting stronger or more frequent than La Nina. No, it's just a cycle. There are years where you have stronger La Nina and there are years you have stronger El Nino. But overall, it's just a cycle. Next. Next slide. Okay, sea ice. Many people, they say that sea ice are melting and therefore that, before. Previous. Yeah, okay. Sea ice in the Arctic are melting and they stop. Wrong. Next slide. Arctic. Because sea ice, they melt and grow every single year for hundreds of years, no exception. And that is the data in the picture is the Arctic ice. The lower data, the chart is Antarctica. Sea ice in Antarctica are melting, but they are also growing every single year, no exception. It is a lie, dishonesty to say that sea ice is just melting and not growing, leading to huge sea rise level. In fact, the problem, the world is not rising sea level, but rising lakes and rivers because of frequent flooding. And the data here, Antarctica experiences coldest half years since measurement began 60 years ago. Again, there is no climate crisis. There is no climate emergency. Climate change is true. Yeah, but it is nature made. Next. growth ng long-term energy supply. I wrote this in August 2021. The indicative projects, the bulk of from say the bulk of 66 gigawatt will be coming from solar, hydro, and wind. The plan is that someday, as the intermittent, unstable, and reliable low output solar wind will require non-cheap batteries. Car battery is not cheap. Okay, the cheapest maybe about 4,000. How much more huge batteries? Okay, this will push up power generation and transmission prices, and grid must get more ancillary services of practically peaking plants. Next. The generation mix from July up to, I got the data from IMOP as of November 9. Okay, this is the, so the data is that from July, coal is 57%, wind solar 2.7%. The RA law of 2008 or RA 9513 took off late because wind solar developers, they want money, high feed-in tariff or guaranteed price for 20 years. What kind of business would give you guaranteed price? Only politicized business. Real business means you can go expand or you can go bankrupt. There's no such thing, guaranteed price. Now it's 2021 and wind solar only produce 2.7% of total generation. And Save the Planet movement wants us to rely on this blackout-friendly energy source. Blackout economics is for the lazy and socialists. It's not for industrialists, industrious, and dynamic people. Next. I conclude. The year of experience is coal is the past, RA is the present, and frequent blackout is the future. For the Philippines, blackout is the past, especially from 1990 to 1991. Coal is the present, which comprise 56 to 57% of total generation yearly. And sustained growth would be the future. But wind solar, which only produce 2.5 to 3% of Philippine total generation, is endlessly pushed, and coal is endlessly attacked. The intermittent RA pushers, just like drug pushers, etc., debt pushers, they want blackout economics and they growth economics. There is no climate crisis. There is no climate emergency. Climate change is true, but it is cyclical and natural, meaning nature-made and not man-made. Pushing intermittence and ease out conventional, reliable fossil fuels are tools of ecological central planning. They are not tools of dynamic growth. Climate alarm leads to climate extortion. Issue in COP meeting leads to more alarm, then leads to bigger climate money being spent from these countries. In Paris 2015, they promised $100 billion for all developing countries. Fast forward 6 years, Glasgow 2021, development now 1 trillion per year. Okay, so we should push for more fossil fuels in the generation plus nuclear. Europe's blackout economics, the growth economics are clear lessons for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Nonoy. It's always interesting to hear your take on things, especially this topic of avoiding blackout economics, power adequacy, and affordability. So I'm sure we'll have some questions later on in the open forum. But now I'd like to move on to our next speaker for this morning. And now we move on to the portion where we talk to our consumer groups and our think tank. Again, think tanks and consumer groups and advocates. Next up, we have Attorney Terry Redon, a lawyer and former congressman. Attorney Terry is the convener of InfraWatch PH, a public policy think tank focused on resolving infrastructure underdevelopment in the power, transport, telecoms, digital, housing, water, and natural resources sectors. He also served as the chair of the Presidential Commission for the Urban Poor. Attorney Terry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paco, Senator Win, President Tindo, and to our fellow panelists. Good morning. I think I'd like to go back again to the intersection of energy policy and politics. No, because very important for the public is for them to see what is an actual platform for energy security and energy policy in the 2022 elections. And well, of course, I think I confirm that Senator Win is not just the committee chair of energy, but he is really one of the leaders of the energy sector, particularly for pushing policy changes and making sure that the power sector continues to move efficiently and within the targets that we would want to see in the next few years. No? And I think I just have 3 points. And the first would be the energy sector should be led by leaders who know the sector. And I think Senator Win is a good example of that. And the people within the executive department are not the best examples of that. No? Many of the panelists and Senator Win had spoken about, the blackouts for this year. And I think a big chunk of it has been pointed to the lack of leadership in the energy sector. And we had seen several politicians that had been complaining that during the blackout, the highest leaders of the energy department were in fact politicking, being involved in issues that are not energy related. And no less than Secretary Cusi had been involved in that at the time when parts of the country were enduring blackouts. What was he doing? What were his deputies doing? They were engaging in, what we can see now is aimless politicking for the 2022 elections, while many of our countrymen are enduring blackouts. And it is not just Secretary Cusi that has been involved in that. The highest leaders of the energy department, including the head of Transco, has also been involved in politics. In fact, the head of IMAP has also been involved in politics at that time, when the public has been enduring severe blackouts and red alerts. So I think the point that needs to be made here is that I think energy policy should be insulated from the daily goings on of national and high level politics. And bureaucrats that want to lead the sector should not have a Jekyll and Hyde personality. If they want to lead the sector, they have to be able to master the sector and understand policy and not dip their fingers into other aspects, because the problems that we are facing in the energy sector are very grave already as it is. And I think we cannot afford executive leaders in a next regime to do the same thing that is being undertaken by the current regime. And as another example, we had seen it in the Beneco affair at the level of the local cooperatives. The problem that we had been encountering in that affair is essentially a question not of competence or not of expertise. It is a question of who is being asked to lead an electric cooperative. Whether people of the current regime want their guys to lead it, or would they allow the electric cooperative leaders to make a determination that they should be the ones to manage and lead their own affairs. So I think that needs to be pointed out to our friends and those that are closely monitoring the developments in the energy sector. Secondly, it is very important for national candidates to know energy policy and not bluff their way through these elections and pretend that they are the white knights and the knights in shining armor for the consumers and the public in, as an example, reducing electricity rates. And we have been seeing in the last 2 to 3 weeks candidates who are actually misunderstanding energy supply and in general the energy sector. One senatorial candidate has been misunderstanding the competitive selection process that the DOE has been undertaking and has been accusing distribution utilities, those in the distribution side of profiteering, no, without providing nuance that the DOE itself, despite politicking in the last few months, had established the competitive selection process to make certain that rates will in fact be competitive and subjected to bidding. No, and several senatorial candidates had in fact been using supposed profiteering by different actors of in the power sector as a reason to basically review all of the franchises and to review all the contracts that had been undertaken between power generators and distribution utilities. No? Another prominent senatorial candidate is using power electricity issues as a platform, no? As an example, calling for the confiscation of the country's leading power utility. Well, obviously, we had made a statement related to that, and we had stated that, well, certainly that is an option for government, but where in the world at the time of COVID will government be able to get at the very least 300 billion to confiscate and pay all of these utilities at market value? No, so I think very important for civil society, for think tanks, and those that are leading the sector to be able to bring to account these types of candidates that would be using the power sector as their mechanism or platform to get votes. No? Kasi it would be very unfair to the for all actors in the sector that would really want to ensure the lowest prices for the consumer, and well, would like to ensure the role of the power sector in economic development. Well, another example are some some national candidates that had also been misunderstanding Mr. Ang's statement on his openness to sell Petron back to government. Some of the people have been very much welcoming the statement of Mr. Ang on his willingness to sell it back to government, without exactly understanding that it had a tinge of irony or sarcasm when he made that statement, because it was basically a statement to show that Petron is not in the best financial straits, no, and it would be a bit weird, or it would be a bit counterintuitive for government to take over Petron at this time. No, so I think all of these things would lead to the point that those that want high-level positions in government, at the presidency, vice presidency, people that want to go to the Senate, hindi natin talaga dapat sila pagbigyan na they will just bluff their way through as though populist statements are acceptable without subjecting any of their statements to further scrutiny. Kasi we would be giving the public also a disservice if we will allow these candidates to just bluff their way through without na hindi ho natin sila nasasagot, no? Yun. And thirdly, and I think this is still relevant, and this is something that we had stated already in a few weeks back, and this is something that many people in government are also calling for, is to reduce taxes not just on oil, but on other aspects that can in fact, on other taxes that can in fact be reduced within the energy sector. So I think the prices of oil remain a bit high at this point, and Dubai crude is still above $80, and in the last few weeks, it has not. The prices remain inflated, and as such, the calls from different sectors continue for excise taxes and the VAT to be suspended. It doesn't have to be suspended at this point on a wholesale level, but I think government, the executive department, we had called on the president to, at the very least, make some emergency measures to undertake executive action without having to wait for Congress to enact legislation allowing the suspension of excise and VAT. Because I think no one would dispute that whether, as a first step, reducing excise or removing excise and then VAT is still acceptable for the public. And we had made the calculations that a wholesale removal, temporary interim removal of excise and VAT would reduce the prices around 15 to 20 pesos, no? And it would revert back to, at the very least, a bit of normal levels, no, as in the past few months, no. Yun, and aside from that, people have been clamoring also for, well, we would like to see platforms on what senatorial candidates or national candidates would want to do on the VAT on electricity, and whether they are open to removing the feed-in tariff for renewables. Because if we are really interested in reducing the costs of electricity, these are, I think, low-hanging fruits that we can in fact undertake as we go towards elections by 2022. Yun lamang po. Maraming salamat. Magandang umaga.
Yeah, thank you, Attorney Terry. That's a great points you raised on the need for genuine leadership, genuine reform, not only in the long term as we move towards an election, but also in the short term in terms of the problems that we're facing today with prices of oil and the excessive taxes that consumers have to pay for. So thanks, Attorney Terry. Next up, we have another speaker, a speaker from civil society, speaking on behalf of the consumers, but at the same time is a former trade undersecretary. He's none other than Attorney Mario Dimagiba. He's the founder and president of Laban to Consumer Inc. He is also a founding member of the Dispute Resolution Group of the Philippine Electricity Market Corporation, and previously served as the VP and General Manager of PNOC. Attorney Dimagiba, good morning. The floor is yours, sir. You're on mute po, I think.
All right, okay na?
Okay na po.
Okay. Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. I think before I read my message, I saw a number of people na kailangan magpugay muna ako, no? Of course, number one, nandiyan si Senator Gatchalian. Good morning, sir. And then I also saw Mr. Minelio Carlos, one of our mentors in the good old days in DTI, and I was still in DTI. I also see some contemporary acquaintances, Romy Bernardo, si Ernie Pantangco, of course, former Congressman Ridon, Mr. Jose Alejandro. You know, if you still remember me, we worked together when we were putting up the petrochemical complex in Maribeles, Madaan. I hope you still remember our group with Frank Roa. So, of course, I'd like to thank Oxy of Citizen Watch for inviting me in this very prestigious institution, the Albert D. De Rosario Institute and the Strat-based studies. All right, let me read to you my message. Good morning to all of you. I'm here as a representative from Laban Consumer Inc., and it is my advocacy to promote consumer welfare. Over the past few months, we have been experiencing increases in our power bills, mainly because of higher pass-through charges. But there is more. There is an ongoing energy crisis which has been affecting markets all over the world. Natural gas, coal, and crude oil prices have been hitting new highs, following the sudden spike in demand as countries started pandemic recovery efforts that coincided with the onset of the winter season. The Philippines is not spared from this. As a net oil importer, our local industries are affected by movements in global prices. As of November 2, 2021, as of November 9, yesterday, on Tuesday, 2000 domestic oil prices resulted already in a net increase of 21 pesos and 95 centavos per liter for gasoline, I think this information are more for Senator Gatchalian. 18 pesos and 10 centavos per liter for diesel and 15 pesos and 74 centavos for kerosene since the beginning of the year. Continuing increases in our power rates are imminent, and we at Laban Consumer Inc. are concerned. We believe that we should do something about things we can control. For instance, my favorite subject matter, the feed-in tariff, which we all know is a policy designed to encourage developers to build more renewable energy projects by giving them a premium rate for the power they produce for a period of 20 years. But what we have seen so far was that it comes at the expense of having the Filipino consumers shoulder the subsidies, whose lives have already been challenged by the ongoing pandemic. Middle of this year, the Department of Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi, in an economic forum hosted by the Philippine government in Washington, D.C., USA, said that the feed-in tariff, and I quote him, quote, proved to be a big mistake as it forced electricity prices in the country upwards, unquote. He even added that the DOE would no longer offer it for prospective projects and is even exploring ways on how they could stop implementing it retroactively, unquote. This is also why Laban Consumer Inc. has been continuously campaigning for either junking the feed-in tariff policy or repealing the existing Renewable Energy Act number 9513 or the RE law as we aim to better safeguard the consumers. DOE data as of end June showed that there are 567 megawatts of committed solar projects until 2027, more than 12,000 megawatts of solar projects and over 5,000 megawatt wind projects are indicative through 2029. As of last year, however, we have seen pit rate for solar projects rise to a whopping 11 pesos and 30 centavos per kilowatt hour from 9 pesos and 68 centavos per kilowatt hour from 2014. Meanwhile, the pit rate for wind projects was 9 pesos and 90 centavos per kilowatt hour in 2020, also showing an increase from the 2014 rate of 8 pesos and 53 centavos per kilowatt hour. These pit adjustments in solar and wind already contribute to higher feed-in tariff allowance, which is part of the power bills that we pay every month. This is a burden for consumers, especially those who are already struggling to pay their bills. Despite the financial support in the form of an agreed and fixed price per kilowatt hour paid to solar and wind energy developers, the irony of the pit is that solar and wind energy power only translate to an installed generating capacity of 4% for solar energy and 2% for wind energy since the enactment of the law 13 years ago. And these are based on DOE data as of end 2020. I'd like to call this as de minimis achievement. This has led to us, Laban Consumer Inc., asking the Congress in May this year to legislate a measure that will amend the RE law, and we have submitted various statements, position papers, and comments for the amendments to the measure. On top of this, we lodged a petition to the ERC to nullify the pit increases. ERC case number 2021-001 RM rulemaking, which is pending in the ERC at the moment. What does the removal of the pit means for consumers? One, they will be spared. We shall be spared from paying 9 centavos per kilowatt hour of pit all or pit allowance. And at present, there is a pending application with the ERC to further increase the rate to over 20 centavos per kilowatt hour, despite lower forecast national sales last year and not so good forecast national sales for this year, primarily to put in money to pay for that what we call illegal feed-in tariff increases that we filed a petition in ERC. Two, RE power plants such as solar and wind will be forced to undergo a competitive selection process or CSP before they sign a power supply agreements with distribution utilities. This is aimed at lowering the prices of electricity as they would have to compete and offer power at least cost possible. Three, RE developers will lose the incentives from receiving an agreed fixed price per kilowatt hour of the electricity they sell. There are many other tools that governments can use to encourage adoption of RE. Another new policy on RE development is called the Green Energy Auction Program. And hopefully, I propose that Senator Gatchalian also listen to this, and hopefully the Green Energy Auction Program is not a pseudo feed-in tariff program in another terminology. Especially during these trying times, empathy and compassion are business imperatives. We believe that putting consumers first will be key to our economic development. Thank you very much, and thank you to ADRi Institute and to Citizen Watch Philippines. Good morning to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, so Attorney Demagiba, thank you. And
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Paco.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
And thank you for sharing your thoughts on upholding transparency and streamlining regulatory procedures in the energy sector. It's always good to hear from you po and Laban Consumer. Next up po, we have another speaker from who will be speaking on behalf of Consumer Group, and he's none other than Professor Louis Montemar. Professor Louis Montemar, the convener of Bantay Consumer Corriente Calzada, or BK3, has over 2 decades of experience in education, research, development, and advocacy work. He is currently an associate professor at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. And he sits on the board of various NGOs and is currently, as I mentioned earlier, the convener of the consumer rights advocacy group BK3. Professor Louis, hi, good morning, sir. Yeah po, you're on mute lang po. Sir Louis, you're on mute. It's no problem. It happens. You're still, oh, there you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. Okay. A lot has already been said. For our organization, I intend to lay down only 3 propositions today. Actually, all of them have already been touched on, but I think this would be propositions that would really be important in moving forward our sector's key agenda. So, first of all, for BK3, and these propositions, by the way, are based on statements released by our group in the last 2 years. So, proposition number 1, the steep electricity price rates in the country are due to several factors, but is mainly born of our long-standing supply problem. This has been already established by the previous speakers. We understand that power price rates fluctuate due to a combination of several factors, including but not limited to 1, the demand for energy, efficiency of power plants, and of course, fuel cost. With the peculiar mix of these factors, in the context of what some may deem as a weak state or a defective democracy, voila, we continue to have electricity price rates in the country which are rather steep. Considering these, we wish to note how government points to power generators when supply dips, but the fact remains that these plants necessarily have to observe certain maintenance cycles to maintain their operating capabilities. BK3 would like to raise that such maintenance cycles should be much better planned, coordinated, and governed by the stakeholders in the industry. Any particular distribution utility, we understand, does this with their substations, and power lines. These cycles are laid out throughout the year. Redundancies are utilized, and maintenance targets or outages are cross-coordinated over. Perhaps the same should be done in the other levels of the power supply chain. For this, government's policies in the sector may need to be developed, clarified, or fine-tuned. Our second proposition: there have been marked improvements in system losses in the last decade. Still, there should be more room for improvement. In a study done by government's very own think tank, PIDS, or the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, way back in 2016, it has been shown that in the post-EPIRA period, system losses reportedly peaked in 2004, but these losses have been reduced by an average of 3.6% annually in the post-EPIRA period. Speaking of improvements, BK3 posits that a more nuanced and balanced critique of the country's energy sector should perhaps look deeper into the electric cooperatives model. To some, the cooperative setup may sound like a good economic model for such a broad-based concern as energy distribution or production. However, available data show that what many seem to have overlooked, and this is that, for instance, Meralco's power rate charges are even lower than the other Philippine distribution utilities than those of the other distribution utilities in the country, which are run as cooperatives. To be more direct, all DUs, we believe, should be monitored closely and given adequate support as may be needed in the interest of the consuming public. Last but certainly not the least, our third proposition is that the issue of green or renewable energy intimately intertwines with the linchpin concern for power supply generation. On this, we believe that government needs to accelerate the pace of technology adoption by developing the necessary regulatory framework, including raising the incentives for both the customer and the supply chain stakeholders. Targets for green energy adoption should be raised, and incentives offered to all players. The mindset should be that global warming scenario is an urgent concern that needs drastic action. I'm sure our friend Noy Noy has something to say about this. On this, we wish to make an example of the live case of Meralco and the DOE, Department of Energy, regarding a reported solar hybrid microgrid project in Cagbalete Island in the east coast of Luzon. From what we know, this electrification project uses solar power technology and battery storage, supplemented by several diesel-powered generators for continuous electricity supply to the island without the need to connect to the main grid, which is several kilometers away from the mainland. It was deemed more cost-effective to build a microgrid with its own generating capacity in that place. UK3 first heard of this case over a year ago, and at that time, only about 100 households were reportedly benefiting from this project, while nearly more than 600 other households were still waiting to be lit. The last we heard, this project of this project, an extension for it has already been filed with the ERC and is waiting approval. The lesson is that we already have a working model which can be further developed and replicated for unserved and underserved communities across the archipelago. So what's happening? In closing, let me point out that annually, the power industry is a 30 trillion peso endeavor. This amount is 10 times our current national budget. Hence, improvements in the sector should really be one of the top concerns of the next national administration, especially as we ease into an even more digitized and thus therefore more electric power hungry social order. So truly, we must push for a more developed Philippine energy sector. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sir Louis. And thank you to all of our panelists this morning. Let me just pull up my program here. So yes, I was correct. Sir Louis, thank you for that and for being our last but not least speaker for this morning's program. At this point, I'd like to open the open forum. We are a bit more than a bit behind schedule, but I think we still have time for more than a couple of questions. And just to, we had this one question has been here since the beginning of the event, and it's from one of our participants, and it's actually a question related to nuclear power, and it's asking, why not include nuclear in the proposal to attain sustainable and clean energy? And we've discussed coal, we've discussed wind. Now we have a participant who's asking about nuclear power and what our speakers have to say about that. So who would like? Sorry, I think I got disconnected for a while. Did anybody want to answer the question about nuclear power? Yes, Sir Nonoy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that because the DOE has already killed new coal plants, especially like for Palawan. Palawan is funny. It is running 100% on oil. So when DMCI wanted to put up 30 megawatt coal, environmentalists attack it. So they have no coal. People hate, they have no problem with diesel as fossil fuel, but they have a problem with coal as fossil fuel. But now, since even if possible, I think that solution for islands like Palawan, Mindoro, Masbate, they are running 100% on genset and fossil fuel. I think the modular small nuclear power is a good place for them. And I think the DOE itself is promoting modular small nuclear power, something like 30 megawatt, no, not 600 megawatt like Bataan nuclear plant. Nuclear is France is running 75% on nuclear power, and you have no problem. Sweden, about 40% running on nuclear, and Korea, 30%. Many countries are running on nuclear power, and they are rich, and they have stable and cheap electricity. Thank you.
Thanks, Fernando. Mr. Pantanco?
The issue of nuclear has always been controversial, even in our Committee on Energy. But as a general principle, I think if we look at nuclear as part of our energy mix, it just adds to the diversification. So in principle, we are not against it. However, the thing is, if it, let's say, involves the rehabilitation of the Bataan nuclear plant, I think the refurbishment of an existing plant is going to be more expensive. And therefore, and remember that the Bataan nuclear plant, if I'm not mistaken, is 300 megawatts. No? So it's not going to be significant in terms of addition, and it would be cheaper to install other types of plants. No? Pesos per kilowatt total investment cost. No? However, just to echo what Nonoy has been saying, we also agree that we should consider nuclear maybe in our island grids. Because, and as an example, Mindanao is predominantly coal. It's very difficult to develop geothermal resources, and it's going to be expensive. I won't go into the details of that, no, but unless somebody has a question, it's very expensive to develop new geothermal resources. So it's either you put up more coal plants or you put up nuclear as an option. And that could be a viable option, let's say in certain major islands that have a significant demand. Note though that nuclear is a base load plant. It has to run continuously. So you cannot use nuclear if your demand curve is on a mid-merit or peaker. It's suitable for baseload. Thank you.
I think
Sir, yeah, Mr. Carlos, go ahead.
President Ramos, he already commissioned a group to study the possible location of future nuclear plants with the idea of preventing communities from settling on those areas. Because what really turned Bataan into a nightmare, the fact that there were surrounding communities there. And I think no matter how safe they claim the future nuclear plants to be, always the community aspect will become a big factor. And that's why I think President Ramos was right in commissioning that study. That study exists. They have already located this place. And then the idea now is for government to prevent people from going to that area and developing it so that it can be a site for future nuclear plants. Because they're beginning to develop better and better, smaller and smaller nuclear plants. But no matter what you say, I think communities will be an essential factor where they will be located.
That's a good point, Paul. Let me just check if anybody else.
Ako, can I join?
Oh, of course. Senator Sherwin, go ahead, Paul.
But personally, as a matter of policy, I'm open to looking at nuclear, but not the legacy technology type of nuclear. Let me just share my experience and some myths that I picked up along the way. I had the opportunity to visit Slovenia and to look at the cousin of this Bataan nuclear power plant. It's exactly the same. It's the same model, the same type, the same manufacturer, the same year. In fact, there are, I think, 4 of those plants built at the same time. One in Korea, one in Brazil, and one in Slovenia, and then ours, of course. The other 3 operated. Didn't operate at all, for political reasons. But the first myth that we picked up is to operate Bataan nuclear power plant, it won't be cheap. The Slovenia plant is quite expensive. And the reason for that, when we talked to the CEO, is over the years, because of age and because of Fukushima, they added more and more safety measures to make that old plant safe. Because it's an old plant. And because of those upgrades, it became very expensive. So it's not, I agree with Ernie, refurbishing this plant will not drive down the price. In fact, there's a big possibility that the price will be even more expensive. And then the other one is legacy plants are very expensive to build. All of the modern traditional or legacy technologies are very expensive. And all of them, the ones in England, the ones in UAE, all of them demanded government subsidy. And of course, we all know where government subsidy will come from, the consumers. And I'm sure si Attorney Vic will be all hell with that. So I've looked at all of these new plants, especially the one in England. They really demanded a lot of subsidies to make it work. And the third myth is the on-time delivery. All of these plants, at the very least, injected energy or injected electricity after 10 years. The plants from start to end, from the application all the way to operation, on the average, the earliest that you can pump in electricity is 10 years. Some of them will go as late as 15 years. So just imagine planning now and then 10 years after you'll get that electricity. And we're talking about the Philippine setting wherein red tape is already heavy. No? So you factor in red tape in the Philippine setting, that 10 years will probably end up 20 years. No? So the deployment for nuclear in our system is not as friendly and as feasible. No? But I do open myself up to the possibility of what Ernie mentioned earlier, the small nuclear power plants. Those are becoming in fashion right now. The SMRs, they call it, the small modular reactors. A lot of the billionaires are investing in that. No? Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, all of them. And the earliest that I've seen that will commercially be available is 2024. I think it's between 2024 to 2029. So having said that, no, I am sure you don't know, some of you might not know this, but for the last 4 years, we've already funded close to 250 million pesos in nuclear power research under the Department of Energy. So the Department of Energy has money to conduct research. And the logic for that, no, is to look beyond and see what technologies in nuclear that we can adopt here in the Philippines. No? Because these things are coming online sooner than later, and we have to keep our eye on those technologies because they will become, eventually they will become smaller, they will become modular, they will become safer, and some of the waste can be reused, no, as many as 10, 20 times. So in other words, we need to look at those new technologies if those technologies can fit in our system.
Yeah, thanks for that, Senator Gatchalian, and for adding those, the myth busting, some of the myths surrounding nuclear energy, but being very real about it at the same time. Okay, so perhaps I can go on to another question. Still sticking to the topic of supply, since we're on the topic of generation. Well, one of the reasons we really wanted to hold this event now is because of the Malampaya shutdown. So we know that it shut down for maintenance last month, and there was a spike in the doubling of the price in WESM, and we know that this is a prelude for what might happen soon when the supply actually runs out. So there's definitely a lot of uncertainty surrounding Malampaya, not only, of course, in terms of the supply, but its ownership as well. And I was wondering what our panel had to say about that. We can expect prices to go up, definitely. And is there anything you want to say that can prepare Filipinos for what they might see when the Malampaya gas field finally does close the shop in 2024? Unless extended, of course. Does anybody want to weigh in on that? Okay, sir, Mr. Patanco. Oh, sir, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm sure Senator Wills got a lot of comments on that. But well, it's been taken up extensively in his Senate hearings. But well, as a former officer of a group, I think it's important that we have to develop indigenous sources, no? Because like Camago Malampaya, I understand you will require at least 2 more wells in order to maintain the supply. So Camago Malampaya still has supply, but it requires a budget to drill new holes. And as a former executive of geothermal in the geothermal industry, it's not because you're drilling the same hole in the same reservoir means you're going to get gas or you're going to get steam. No? It's happened in the past in my previous employment, is that even if you drill a hole in the same field, you don't get the gas. No? In Malampaya, it requires a certain technical expertise. But I think what's critical is to develop a more reliable source in the short term. And that means the construction of terminals. And I think it's important that these terminals, and there have been groups that have been interested, aside from First Gen, no? That's been interested in developing terminals in order to import LNG. We can take advantage of the lower prices of LNG worldwide and multiple sources. You not only have Middle East, you have the US, fracking gas, you have you have a myriad of sources, no, from which you can pick. The critical thing here is that you get a reliable source. And there have been groups that are interested in putting up terminals. And it doesn't take long, no, to develop these terminals, particularly for those who have existing berthing facilities. No? But in the medium term, it's important that we develop other natural resources, because if not, our reliance, I think Senator Wynn had aptly put this, no? Our reliance on imported fuel is very, very high. And if anything happens, and this is what we've been saying, if anything happens worldwide, it will affect us significantly. So we have to develop our indigenous sources. And Recto Bank, we understand. That's why a country is very interested in Recto banks, because it holds substantial reserves. No? And that's why the same country, I see my friend Romy is smiling. Again, it pays to be a gentleman farmer. The same country wants to develop natural gas, the natural gas field, because it's significant. No? But the point here is that we should align our interests, because the worst thing that can happen is you have a foreign company that develops a natural gas there and ships it to their home country where there is gas that's needed. So it's important that there's some form of sharing with the Philippines. It must be in place. And you need Camago to interconnect from the Recto Bank. That's why Camago, the operation of Camago is very crucial in order to maintain the interconnection to Luzon. Otherwise, to connect a new pipeline from the Recto Bank, let's say, to Batangas is going to take another 20 years. Also, as a note, no, I forgot to mention this, LNG can be an alternative fuel that can be transshipped to our islands. And that's why I think the group is also espousing the development of an LNG terminal in Mindanao, in several areas, in Davao, Cagayan de Oro, in order such that we can transship the gas from any terminal here and ship it there and use it to diversify our power generation. Thank you. I hope it answers the question.
Indeed, you did, po. Tongue twister.
Build on
Yes, sir. Of course, po.
Can I build on what Ernie? I just want to build on what Ernie mentioned, because he mentioned a lot of important facts. No, on top of that, I get regular briefing from the different industry players, and I know for a fact that the depletion of Malampaya came in sooner than later. No? And this is actually quite worrisome, because in the original date of the depletion, it was slated on 2024. But I heard from First Gen and some other players that it's apparently coming in sooner than later. No? This is worrisome because, as we know, Malampaya supplies 20% of our requirement. So having said that, SC38 is quite a prolific area, no? And Shell wanted to drill more wells around that area because obviously they've been there for the last 30 years. They know what's in that area, no? And apparently, before they can drill, obviously they also want to extend their contract first, because these things take time to recover, no? But they were not given that opportunity, no? So this is my own personal analysis, no? I think that's what drove them to sell out, no? Because they were not given that opportunity to drill. Now, moving forward, whoever's gonna take control of that rig needs to have the financial muscle and the technology to drill. No? To drill one well, Ernie, correct me if I'm wrong, it's about $20 million. The problem with drilling is it's like going into the Russian roulette. No? because the risk is so high. So the 20 million, we don't even know if you can get your returns. So so the new owner, whoever that is, should have that financial muscle. Which brings me, that's why in the law, and this is where this whole thing is now blowing up. In the law, in PD 87, whoever will come as a new contractor should have government approval before they can come in, precisely because the technical aspects, the financial aspects are very important aspects for the new contractor to possess, or else we will not maximize that area and we will have very big problems in terms of energy security. So I just want to add that because those are the things that we've been discussing, and we want to talk about we will conduct a hearing on what Ernie said earlier about the Ilihan contract that will expire in 2022, because Ilihan is 1,200 megawatts. That's quite a huge sum. And then also this news that we got that the depletion is coming sooner than later, because we need to replace that, or else prices will go up because the generators will use liquid fuel. So those are the things that I want to share with the group.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, Mr. Alejandro, I think also wanted to chime in.
My take on this is that what do you want to do with it? Do you want to treat it like water, which applied strategically? Our notion so far seems to be we'll use it as far as we can use it, or as long as there is water. But I think one way to look at it is strategy. We have negotiated. Producing countries like US and the others do not choose on these terms. It's a strategic negotiating item, assuming their own supply. So I think we have to think strategically in all of these things, rather than assuming the whole of it, like the way we consume water.
Okay.
It's for us to use that strategically so that we can negotiate better when you look for supplies.
I see.
And that's my take. I always using everything we have. Okay.
Understood, sir.
We have never learned how to use things, our asset, strategically.
Okay, sir. Thank you. You were a bit choppy, but I think we got the main point.
Like a common consumer, use it as far as we have it. Our leaders, our assets, strategically, so that they can negotiate better for others for the same. The US has the same thing, but they can negotiate strategically.
Understood, po. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Alejandro. That was a good insight also on the need for strategic thinking and use of our.
We have to use some of our assets. We have to use them strategically.
Yes, sir. Okay, po.
Instead of consuming them.
Okay, sir. Thanks, po. So, maybe I'll move on to. We're over time, but I wanted to get just at least maybe two more questions in. So the second to the last really is again for maybe our consumer groups or anybody really, think tank speakers, because we've noted that and as it was noted in the Q&A about the fossil fuel reliance, the oil industry was mentioned. Sorry about that. The oil industry was mentioned, and there was a question: what can the oil industry do to somehow manage their costs similar to how power prices are somehow controlled? We understand that pump prices ballooned to 40% since the start of the year, but power costs managed to be below 10%. That seems to be a huge disparity. So I think the question is, we see the ballooning of prices of the prices at the pump, but how our electricity bills aren't ballooning as much, 10% versus 40%, and it's more of a comment actually. But I also wanted to throw it to our speakers if they had any insight on on what the energy sector has been doing to keep costs down, and perhaps what they can continue to do to manage prices. Well, one thing I wanted to ask. Okay, Mr. Pantanco is to the rescue. Thank you, sir, and Mr. Romy afterwards. Mr. Pantanco.
I will defer to Romy, and then I can be the last.
Sige po, sige po.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Ernie. Yeah, no, I'm a the whole direction of ADRi is to go towards a more market and competitive industry. If you want to bring down the price, you have to make sure that more supply comes on stream, and then competition will bring down the price. Now, unfortunately, some of the interventions of government have actually worked in the direction of restricting supply. I guess a good example would be a secondary markup on the WSM. Now, that would have the effect of discouraging peaking plants who cannot operate. They don't operate 365. They only operate when there is a spike in the demand, and then they have to gain in those periods the revenues that would justify building such a plant. So this is an example of how some interventions actually choke up supply and have the result of raising prices. This is true also with all of the ease of doing business obstacles. If you require 300 signatures before you can operate the plant, you're going to drive out a lot of players, especially from abroad, who do not understand and know where do they encounter this kind of a situation. So we have to improve on the ease of doing business. I guess what we should not do would be more interventions, certainly not price controls, which is the knee-jerk reaction of some of the advocates. That would be result in the opposite. Or if you like, you can have you might have low prices, but you will have no power. So those are my take, and I turn over to somebody who actually understands the sector, Ernie Pantanco. Salamat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Romy.
Paco, I can wait. I can be the last one. It's okay. I have some thoughts on it, but it's okay. There were some who raised.
Does anybody else want to weigh in?
Sorry, before I give the floor to nakalimutan ko lang. Yeah, if we are sensitive about prices, we have to make sure that it's really competitive across fuel types. If the moment we start favoring expensive by either fit rates or by quota allocations, then you will have the effect of a higher price. So I write all of the points that I've heard from especially President Alejandro and Mr. Carlos. Thank you, Chairman Carlos. Thank you.
Thanks, Sir Romy. Sir Nonoy? Mr. Ablas, did you want to weigh in po? Oh no, it's either
about high oil prices. There are two ways that there's transmission mechanism from high oil prices to electricity. I think one was mentioned already by Romy through more expensive picking ancillary services and picking plant, whatever that is available, and price cap, primary and secondary price cap is really wrong. It will make cheap but not available. No? Cheap electricity but blackout. Okay, and if you have blackout, the rich will buy genset, which is running on diesel, and the poor will buy candles. Candles means more fires, more destruction of property and death to people. No, blackout is horrible. That's why anti-fossil fuel drama to kill fossil fuel that's danger because it will kill people not 100 years from now, but today. No, we have blackout. You have more accidents in the street. There are more crimes, more stabbing, more abduction, more rape. No, more murders. Streets should always be bright. That's why it should be a lot of light. No, so that's transmission number one. From high oil prices to high non-availability or less availability of picking plant will prevent blackout. The second is the UCME, the Universal Missionary Electrification, as I mentioned, Palawan, Mindoro, Masbate, Marindoque, Camiguin, etc. They're all running 100% on genset and oil. So when the price of oil is expensive, then the generation cost will be expensive, and therefore the pass-on cost in the form of UCME will also be higher. That's why the danger of expensive energy supposedly to save the planet is really wrong. Another thing, LPG. When LPG is expensive, people shift to oiling and firewood, so people kill more trees. That's why cheap LPG is pro-environment. Making LPG expensive supposed to save the planet is the opposite that happens. There are a lot of studies done in Africa. A certain percentage of price increase from LPG, and the poor quickly shift to firewood. And the public forest is the calbo to save the planet. That's not happening. Cheap energy, cheap fossil fuel is pro-environment.
Thanks, Sir Nonoy. Oh, Mr. Pantanco, did you want to chime in quickly with a short?
Thank you.
Thanks.
The point is, well, fuel accounts for about 50% of generation cost, depending on the technology, up to 60%. Unfortunately, because I think Senator Sherwin has shown this, we rely very heavily on imported fuel. So to put it bluntly, there's nothing we can do about it. It's the world prices. No? The only way we can mitigate that is by diversity of our fuel sources, plus, of course, developing indigenous. That's why Camago Malampaya was crucial, because it helped lessen our dependence on oil. So we have to develop, but that takes time. No? In the meantime, what we have suggested, and this has happened in the past, and maybe I'd like to echo really what Terry was pointing out earlier. One of the things that we in PIPA, when I was still president, was trying to know is to support local industries through the use of Camago Malampaya funds. What we wanted to do was allocate about 30% of Camago Malampaya funds for export-oriented industries. Note that in Camago Malampaya, close to, if I remember my figures right, 1 peso 60 centavos is the royalty that's got to be paid to government. So why not use that royalty to incentivize our export-oriented industries by giving them some form of subsidy in order to expand, no? And to promote these export-oriented industries. The other thing that we should look at, and I think Terry had already brought this up, is really the VAT issue. Under EPIRA, in order to lower electricity cost, we were supposed to be VAT-free. However, with due deference again, it's easier to collect from an electric consumer than to collect from the general public in terms of taxes. That's why DOF put in the VAT on electricity. But the intent of EPIRA was really to not to put VAT on electricity in order to provide a lower source. Remember, VAT accounts for 12% of your price, no? Across the whole chain. So if your price now of delivered power is 12 pesos, that's 12% of 12 pesos that you could save, no? If you could cut down on certain of this. I'm sure, I'm sure Senator Sherwin also has been discussed in the Senate hearings now on how we can lower prices. But Those are just some of our suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patanco.
Well, what has Paco.
Go ahead, Terry.
Well, what has not been discussed pala is the litigation against Udena on the Malampaya sale, no, of Chevron. So I think these are among the risks for them in the event that the next regime will not be an ally of the current regime. Kasi I'm quite certain that syempre, if you have an ally regime, that gets validated, no? Pero I'm quite certain, and we had seen many of these types of litigation before, na pagkakalaban ho yung nakaupo dyan, they can basically say goodbye to that billion-peso Chevron deal. And I'm quite certain that whoever it is that are involved there, whether the private sector and their government cohorts, may kalalagyan ho talaga sila pagka ho hindi nila kakampi yung uupo.
Thanks, Terry.
May I add the final point, Paco, if I may? I don't think we've discussed enough the importance of having a transmission network that is in place, because in affecting both supply and prices. Because if generators are discouraged from building because they cannot connect to the system, then you will have shortage of supply and you will have high prices. And I think that is what we're seeing already. I know this is an issue that has been discussed at great length in the committee of Senator Win, but I really think our government regulators, ERC and DOE, have to do a better job in making sure that the transmission facilities are built in a timely way. And I know there is a big lag in the rollout. I also appreciate that it's something that has been brought up, and so there you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Romy. Actually, po, like I've said on a couple of occasions, we are over time. But I do want to just close out with this one question for everybody. I mean, we organized this virtual town hall discussion on the premise that the energy sector is key to our economic recovery from the economic crisis triggered by the pandemic. We're also holding this discussion with the elections coming up in 2022 in just a few months, and that's why one of the main things that we also wanted to discuss was the need for the energy sector to be part of the agenda of the next administration. So now, if I could just go around and ask everybody, maybe just if you had one priority that you think, or policy or reform, whatever it may be, that you want the next government to prioritize, what would you say that is? And I'll just go around, starting perhaps with Sir Nonoy Oplas, because he had his hand up already earlier. So Sir Nonoy?
If I have
one quick thing, just one quick thing.
Is energy agnosticism.
Okay.
Or whatever. The ones who decide energy mix, the consumers, not government, not NGOs, not the UN, not DOE, not the ARC, the consumers.
Okay, sir. Thanks, Bob. Mr. Carlos, do you have the one priority you think the next administration should have for energy? You're on mute nga lang po. You're on mute.
In industry, we need lower cost electricity, anything that will reduce that cost of electricity at this point. And I think government has been equating this with going green. I think there are places I pointed out earlier where we can go green very economically, very competitively. Let's do it. But certainly don't impose it on the whole country, especially industry at this point. We need competitive electricity.
Thank you, Bob. Competitive electricity. Professor Montemar, did you want to weigh in with your top priority for our next for the next administration in terms of energy?
Well, from my presentation, actually, I think it's very clear to us that the top priority should really be on improving supply. That has
Okay.
been the problem since in fact, immediately after EDSA. And it's been decades already.
Mhm. Thank you, sir. I'm just going into order of the pictures on my screen.
Okay.
Mr.
Okay.
Mr. Alejandro, sir, would you have the last point? You're on mute lang, sir. Sorry po. You're on mute.
When you look at the industry in the EPIRA and over that, nobody is already in control of the energy sector. Not the OE, not the RC, not the national government. They practically almost privatized everything. Now, the only way to bring it back to discipline in a developing country like ours, where 50% of the people are poor, where the distribution system is 109 co-ops, a small and a large utility, nobody can get control except the buyer. I have a radical proposition way back, and I want to send now. The government should be the buyer of the power, and he will give it to the utilities. Then he equalizes. The biggest buyer is always the biggest negotiator. If NPC is converted into a buying power, then they can say which one they want to buy, how much, and so forth. Note that the receivable will not be at risk. When you look at all the utilities, they're all paying except the Mindanao area. Everybody pays. Nobody is a bad debt except the Mindanao area. So in terms of receivable, there is no risk. All utilities pay on time except the Muslim area. Now, if I were the government and I'm the buyer, then I can impose discipline.
Sige, sir.
I can put the kind of power I want, where to put it up, and so forth. And then bring it up to the utility. I don't have to do anything. I may add 1 or 2 centavos for the service. I don't have to do any great studies except positioning where the utility should be, where the power plant should be, and so forth, and do a very good and a very professional bidding for all the utilities, for all the
Radical idea, but it
very good.
sounds very
That's the only way to bring back discipline into the system. We have
May I
imitated
write?
countries that are totally different from us. They're highly developed,
Yeah.
they can do it. We are a poor country with 50% of the people are poor.
Sige, sir.
And so we need to foster all the resources that we need and manage it well.
Thank you, sir. Okay, sir Romy. Go ahead.
Yeah, may I write on that? Well, first of all, I agreed with everything that Mr. Alejandro said earlier. And I also agree with what he said now, with only one proviso, that he is the chief buyer for government. Otherwise, well, we know, we are familiar with incidents of government procurement. And we only have to watch the hearings of the Senate to be worried about giving government monopoly rights in procurement. But to your more general question as to what is my parting statement, it is very much aligned with Mr. Chairman Carlos, President Alejandro said, and Nonoy Oplas, that in the energy trilemma, if I can use the World Economic Forum triangle trilemma, at this stage in our life, we should overweight security and affordability. The environment, we are a small drop in the bucket, a rounding error in the ozone layer issues.
Yes,
If at all, what the attention we give should not be to the mitigation issues, but adaptation. But if we are poor because we neglected security and affordability, we will not be able to do all of the climate change adaptation spending that we need to do as a country that will be very much affected. So that's my last quotation would be something that I heard from a wise man. We dislike coal and coal industries, but we should hate the abject poverty that we see with 25% of our population. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Romy. Attorney Terry, any last words, and then I'll go to Mr. Pantanco and maybe Senator Sherwin if he's okay with that.
Well, I think much has been said already about what you wanted to do, particularly on taxation. But I think as a parting shot, most important at this point is for us to be able to elect better national leaders. And I understand that there has always been, a reservation on what types of leaders have we been electing into office. But I'd like to assure the public that there are good people there. Sherwin is there. Senator Sherwin is there. I mean, it's a glowing endorsement of him. But we have been together for the longest time, and he is an example that there are good people in government. And the people that have left, sina Attorney Vic, these are good people in government that have served in government, and we have all the time in the world. I think there has been desperation that we have not been seeing the change that we wanted to see in the soonest time. But I think for as long as there are good people that believe in reform, in good policy, I think we will always be in a better place. And at this point, very important that we will not lose sight of the elections. And the most important thing is for us to be able to elect better leaders at the highest levels, presidency, vice presidency, and in the Senate. So, and like what I've been saying, there are people there. We had elected people that are good people, and we have to keep on electing them. So, yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Thanks, Attorney Terry. Mr. Pantanco, last words po.
Thank you, Baco. It's difficult. It's a complicated. That's why in our MAP Committee on Energy paper, we have several points already for the incoming presidentiables. But personally, the thing is, after going through 4 or 5 administrations and being involved in the power industry, what I'd like to see is an integrated power development plan for the next 20 or 30 years. That's got to be adhered to. Because each administration, we've experienced this, each administration comes in, each secretary of energy who comes in has a different set of priorities. And we keep shifting from one to the other, and there's been no consistency. So we've been trying to develop this, and that's where we're looking at UP-ERDFI, who started this study to develop an integrated energy development plan that we should stick to moving forward despite changes in administration. The second, and most importantly, and I guess Terry got ahead of me, is we hope Senator Win will continue to be the chairman of the Committee on Energy, because it's very difficult when you have people who try to attend hearings only for the sake of being shown on television, saying one thing, and then somebody else comes in, says the same thing, and then leaves. We need consistency, and of course, the education that comes with this industry, which is very important. And Senator Sherwin has always shown that he's really after the welfare of the growth of the energy system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pantanco. Senator Sherwin, would you like us to have any last words po?
I have to win first, Ernie, before I can get the chairmanship again, one step at a time. But thank you. And well, I thank Ernie. Ernie has been really gracious with his time. Of course, Attorney Vic, Terry is also quite active in the committee, and all of their comments are very important in terms of shaping policy and also legislation. But just as a end statement, I'd like to continue what Terry mentioned earlier about serious bureaucrats. Energy is such a complex industry. I don't claim to be an expert. In fact, when I took this chairmanship, I had to learn. It was a steep curve for me, and Ernie was one of those people who guided me, actually. And it was a very difficult, it's a very complex and difficult sector, but it can be learned, and it can be improved, and you just need to have someone who is reform-minded. It's important that the person who will head this should be reform-minded and honest, no? That this person wants to reform it. It cannot be managed half-baked, or it cannot be managed remotely. You need to really manage it hands-on, because you're talking about energy security, you're talking about energy prices, you're talking about oil and gas, you're talking about RE. Energy is such a wide and expansive topic. No? And on top of that, we don't control our sources. No, we're susceptible to external factors. So it's very complex. No? So I thank ADR for bringing this panel of experts together to talk about energy and putting it right front and center. And like what Terry said earlier, we need the next leader who knows at least some form of knowledge in energy, because it affects all of us on a daily manner. So thank you, ADR, and thank you, Paco. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Senator Sherwin. And thank you to all of our panelists. We could go on and discuss this topic for the rest of the day and into the night, into the evening. But at this point, I really just have to pass on the program, the microphone, to our partners at Citizen Watch, represented here by its convener, Mr. Orlando Oxales, to deliver the closing remarks for today's program. Mr. Oxales?
Hi. Thank you, Paco. Thank you, Paco, the Executive Director of Strat-based ADRi. Thank you also to Professor Dindo Manhit, the President of ADRi. And really many thanks to all of our panelists today, led by our champion for the energy, for our big champion for good policy for the energy sector, Senator Win Gatchalian. And also, I'd like to just mention and personally thank our panelists, Attorney Jose Alejandro of the PCCI, Mr. Ernesto Pantanco, the Chairman of Energy Committee of Management Association of the Philippines, Mr. Meneleo Carlos Jr. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation, the Chairman Emeritus of the Federation of Philippine Industries. Of course, Mr. Romeo Bernardo, the Vice Chairman of FEF, and of course, a good friend, Mr. Nonoy Oplas Jr., President of Minimal Government Thinkers, Attorney Terry Don, our partner in advocacy as a convener of IntraWatch Philippines, Attorney Vic Dimagiba, who are always we always see and is very active in protecting our consumers' rights as Laban Consumer President, and of course Professor Louis Montemar, the convener of Bantay Consumer Corriente Calzada BK3, who also from his point of view and his style of advocacy as really more of a grassroots point of view of consumers' welfare and rights. Thank you for gracing and sharing your insights, Professor Montemar. On our part in Citizen Watch as consumers, just to share some thoughts, we've seen many times how power plant breakdowns happen to occur while other plants are doing planned maintenance, have bumped up generation costs when distribution utilities are forced to buy power from the WESM to meet their customers' power demand. This always happens around summertime when power demand is at its peak, when water levels of hydropower plants are not at full capacity because of low water levels, and when all air conditioning units are working overtime and full blast because of the hot weather. This recurring problem reflects how thin our power reserves are, and it's worrisome because next summer is the May 2022 national elections. The prospect of debilitating power outages will not be a mere inconvenience, but an economically devastating blow to all individual consumers and all business enterprises. The most productive regions of the country, key in driving the growth of our gross national product, will be greatly affected. Our energy regulators need to act fast on accelerating power plant builds and developing indigenous sources of energy to move our power situation from barely sufficient to surplus. Before economic recovery can take off, our energy supply must be at a level of stability and affordability to attract new investments that we will need to compete versus all the other economies that experts already say, or actually predict, will recover earlier than ours. Energy resiliency is a matter of national security that must have the purest approach and benefits our national interests, our people's interests. We need a power and energy agenda devoid of corrupt interests. We need a clear roadmap that ensures stable and affordable electricity for the country's economic recovery. Thank you very much. And I wish everybody a good afternoon and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Professor Manhit, and to all of our speakers.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Have a
Thank you.
good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
A recording will be available
po.
on social media. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.